Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club Picks panel. I always am so excited when I get asked to do these because the things that I get to read are just amazing, and I can't wait to introduce them all to you. We hope that you've been enjoying the day so far. My name is Ron Block, and I'm with the Cuyahoga County Public Library in Cleveland, Ohio. I'll be moderating this session, and we all love a compelling book that readers can't wait to talk about. And today's guest works certainly fit that bill. We have such a wide variety to share today, from historical fiction to contemporary, and even a few debut authors in the mix. Every single one of these books pulled me right in, expanded my heart and my head in the best possible ways. Let's not waste a minute listening to me blather on and on. So I would love to introduce, and if I get any of the names wrong, I hope I'll be corrected because I want you all to hear the correct pronunciations. Ayobami Adebayo, author of A Spell of Good Things from Cuyahoga. Ore Agbaje-Williams, the three of us from Putnam. Jenny Jackson, Pineapple Street, Pam Dorman Books. Martha Hall Kelly, The Golden Doves from Ballantine Books. And Parini Shroff, The Bandit Queens, Ballantine Books. Oh, there they all are. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks.
Hi, thank you.
It's
So
great
excited to be
see
here.
you. It's great to meet you. And I just want to again say thank you for allowing me to read your books early. I always feel so honored when I get to do this. And I just feel like I'm in on a little secret that everybody's going to find out later. So I'd like to just get started, if you don't mind. I just have some round robin questions for everybody that I want everybody to hear, not me. I want them to hear you and all about your work. So we're going to start with A Spell of Good Things. Ayobami, your book is searing. It looks at the differences and similarities between the haves and the have-nots in Nigeria. Where did the idea for this first come from?
Thank you so much, Ron, and thank you to everyone who's logged in to watch this. So I started thinking about the story that would become this novel a few years ago. I was working and I was going back from work. I was going home from work and there was some traffic. So I had to take a detour and I ended up in a neighborhood that was very, very impoverished. It wasn't too far from where I lived. And it was a part of town that I'd never been in before, that I'd never seen before. And I spent a bit of time on that street, just looking at people in front of their homes and imagining their lives. I remember seeing a boy who was about 14 years old, just walking out of a house. And for weeks and months after that experience, I kept thinking about that day and that neighborhood. And I think what struck me the most was how I'd lived in that city for so long and was so unaware of the lives of people in that neighborhood, for instance, and how easy it is for us to live next to people that remain invisible to us in some ways, in so many ways, and yet our lives are so interconnected. So I wanted to write a book about that. And I carried that moment along for a few years. And then I began writing A Spell of Good Things eventually.
Well, I'm certainly glad you did. And I know readers are going to be. It was just a book that grabbed me right from the very beginning. And by the end, I was sobbing. It really is. It's so wonderful.
Thank you.
Let's move on to the three of us, another stellar title on the list here. And Ore, again, highly original and very successful format here that I don't believe I've ever read that kind of a setup before. But it's all told in a day and it's three very distinct voices. Can you talk about how the idea to construct it that way came from, and the idea to tell that story?
Thank you. And thank you for reading as well. I really appreciate it. So this was in 2020 that I wrote, the three of us, and we were in one of our various lockdowns in the UK. I don't know if you'd seen on the news, we had quite some fun with our lockdowns. We had like 10 of them. And I thought, I'm going to dip back in the dating pool. Why not? Just for fun. Let's see what's going on. Which was my first mistake. But I met someone on there, and I was telling my best friend Grace about him, and I was saying, oh, I really like him, and he's this and he's that, all that kind of stuff. And then she was like, oh God, now you're going to get a boyfriend, and I'm never going to speak to you. I'm never going to see you because you're going to spend all your time with him. And I was like, no, Grace, he has to understand that you come first. Which was a half joke, but not really a joke. And so I started to wonder what it would be like if there was a friend who hated her best friend's partner or her best friend's husband or wife or whatever. And then what would happen if the partner felt the same way about the best friend, and what that dynamic could look like. And Temi was the first person I wrote. The first line is completely unchanged since when I first started writing it. And I think Temi as a character and her sort of like slightly chaotic but highly entertaining nature really just sort of was a really big part of the novel and helped me to frame a lot of other things, whether it's people who then seemed in contrast to her or who were opposed to her or who were kind of like her. I just loved that she was this big personality and how much sort of space she took up. And so, yeah, I just sort of started writing from there. And the wife's perspective came first because she is the most, I think she's the most unreliable narrator of the three, I would say. And I kind of wanted to have, us see it from her eyes and then see other people and how they see her. But yeah, I thought it's interesting because I think people dislike or like their friends' partners. But in sort of the submission process for the book, I didn't realize that maybe people hadn't sort of explored it in fiction before. But I think it's just quite funny to see sort of where people land on either side and who they agree with and who they disagree with, who they think is telling the truth, that kind of thing. But yeah, it all started from a conversation. And that's why I will never stop talking, because conversations are how you get the best ideas.
It really is. And I think the three perspectives are just so unique in that, but as readers, they're going to find themselves in some one of them, but then they'll change their minds real quick too. They'll keep going back and forth.
Yeah.
Well done. Okay, we're going to move on now to another version of the haves and have-nots. And I think that's kind of a tie here with all these books, even though they're so very different. It's kind of the contrast between the haves and the have-nots, whether it is money or freedom or rights that they do or don't have and stuff. So I think that really kind of threads through all of these stories. But we're going to now talk about Pineapple Street. It's a heartwarming and hilarious story, Jenny. What brought you to trade your editor cap and want to write a book of your own? And did you find conflict, or did it help you switching between the two roles?
Well, this sounds ridiculous to say, but I actually really never intended to trade my editor cap for fiction. It was just, I've been a book editor for 20 years and I love my job. But during the pandemic, we live in Brooklyn, and we took our two small children and we drove up to the country in Connecticut, and we bunked up with my in-laws for 6 months.
Oh,
and that is exactly what it sounds like, So I had, of course, I've been with my husband for 17 years. I know them really well. They're lovely people. Spending a long weekend with somebody is really, really different than living with them for 6 months. And over again, these tiny moments just kept reminding me it's not my family, and it wasn't because they were trying to exclude me, and it wasn't because I was being standoffish. It's just our families of origin are these really powerful units, and they're sort of impenetrable. And so a little germ kind of started growing in my head and thinking, gosh, I mean, I still have something in common with them, but what would it be like to marry into a family where you had an even bigger divide, where you came from just an even greater social different strata? And I think my work as an editor overall helped me so much to write a novel, because I work with kind of what I think of as the best of the best. And so I've sort of learned at the knee of some of my greatest mentors, and I've learned a lot about comic writing from certain of these writers. Pineapple Street is a comic novel, and I publish Kevin Kwan and Helen Fielding and Katherine Heine and Jennifer Close. And I learned about layering in jokes from them. And I learned about how to use sort of characters in a non-mean-spirited way to get to the joke. One of the things that Kevin Kwan told me that was really, really helpful is Kevin Kwan said that when he was writing Crazy Rich Asians, he kept a Post-it note over his desk that just said the word joy. And I found that simple and enormously instructive, because what he's saying is your job as a writer is to make somebody feel something, and you can be really clear about the feeling that you want to give them. And I knew that, you know, we're all in kind of a dark place at this period during lockdown, and joy was something I wanted for me to be spending time with, and it was something I wanted my readers to be feeling. And so I just stuck up that Post-it and followed his orders. And then, you know, another thing that I know I learned from Helen Fielding is, you'll all remember Bridget Jones, which is obviously a retelling of Pride and Prejudice. And she does this thing in there where she creates this sort of wonderful romantic tension between Bridget and Mark Darcy, where they sort of hate each other's guts, but they kind of like each other, but they hate each other, but they like each other. And without meaning to, I think that that is really a relationship that I created on the page between two of my characters, between Georgiana and Curtis, who she falls for. Because what is more delicious than a guy you hate who maybe you love? So those were all things that I learned from my writers and that ended up sort of finding their way into the book. So overall, I think that being an editor really helped me write the book. I will say that one of the things that was hard about it is what I will call the vibe shift. And that is when I was writing away on something and I was in the zone. And then, you know, for scheduling reasons, because I have a day job, I had to hit pause and edit something else. And if that something else was really different from what I was writing, if I was editing a wilderness thriller or historical fiction, it was a little bit like when you've just brushed your teeth and you take a big drink of orange juice, and it's like, you love orange juice, but it's really, really like rough back to back. And so I discovered that I sort of needed a palate cleanse and a moment between a deep edit on someone else and coming back to writing my book. But nothing more than a palate cleanse. That was really the only piece of it that was hard for me. The rest of it has just been like total joy and fun for me.
That's wonderful. And yes, it's hysterical. The emails between Georgiana and Curtis are just classic. But there's also a lot of heart to the story too. So it is funny. It's very funny, but I think there's a lot of tender moments in it as well. Okay, Martha Hall Kelly, The Golden Doves. Let's talk about this story. And what you do so beautifully is bring things to life that we didn't know about. I said to you before we were on here, it's like, sometimes I don't know how you do some of this research and not jump off a cliff, because it's
yeah, no joy there.
Atrocities. We'll talk about the joy.
Some joy. Yeah.
Talk about where this story came from. You must have found something, because usually it's you find something or hear something and you let it bloom from there.
Absolutely. When I wrote my first book, Lilac Girls, I went out on book tour, and I was at a JCC down in Florida, and a woman introduced me. She was a Holocaust survivor. Her name is Irene Zitzblatz, and she talked about it's really horrible, but she was experimented on by Josef Mengele when she was 8 years old. And after I got a chance to talk to her, and she gave me this little pin, and I don't know if you can see it, but it's Hebrew for always remember. And we became instant friends, which was so fun. And then she gave me a ride back to my hotel with her daughter. And we sat in her car for 2 hours in the parking lot of my hotel. And she told me the story. I don't think she talks about it a lot, the details of it. Steven Spielberg included her in one of his documentaries, but she told me the whole story about how she and her mother and little sister were on the platform at Auschwitz when they just arrived. And Dr. Mengele wanted the mother because she had blue eyes. And Irene held on to her sister's hand as her mother told her. And the mother said, "I'm not going." And Mengele took his baton and hit their hands, the two little girls, and took Irene. She was the big sister at 8. And the mother said, I will come find you. And so, not to tell her whole story, but it really, it was really like changed me. And so, the mother also gave her 5 diamonds, which she swallowed and she kept, and she still wears them on a pendant. She was unbelievable.
Wow.
I was contracted to write my next 2 books, but I kept thinking about her and her story and Mengele and how, I mean, we all know that, they never found him and he died, but I just kept thinking, how did that happen? How did he escape, first of all? What's going on with all those Nazis? So many of them just kind of like disappeared. They weren't on the Nazi rat line. And so when it came time to write this new book, Golden Doves, I sat down and really dug into that. And it was just astounding what I found. I was really lucky because a lot of the CIA documents had just been declassified. So I really got, now people don't really care that much anymore, but I really dug into that. And a book that was super helpful was Operation Paperclip. I think a lot of the librarians would definitely be familiar with that. And that's the secret intelligence program that brought Nazi scientists to America. And a lot of the Nazis escaped that way, thanks to the United States, who brought them here. So once I dug into that, it was really just fascinating. And I thought, I need 2 really badass women characters that can be in this world and go to Ravensbrück concentration camp and have terrible things done to them, and then hunt down the doctor that did it. And in my book, his name is Dr. Snow. He's kind of a Dr. Mengele character, a composite character. But yeah, it's more of a thriller than any of my other books have ever been. I didn't realize that until I asked some of my author friends to blurb it, and they were all, Lisa Scottolini said, it's a thriller. I was like, what? But I kind of didn't realize that was happening, but I wrote it during COVID. And I think I was so desperate to get out there and like do stuff that I, had these 2 women, they lose something one loses their mother, the other loses an infant at the camp. And so they're on a mission to hunt that guy down, and they do. So that was the kernel.
Wow, it's so powerful. And I recently talking to John Truby about The Anatomy of Genres, this new book, and he talked about how many books are very often more than one genre, and that's why I think the thriller thing came through. And you hadn't really maybe thought that, but it really it comes through. It's really I would call it a thriller too.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah,
that's
yeah. John Truby knows his stuff, I think. Ooh.
okay.
So let's go on to the Bandit Queens. This is another book out of this group I just really love, and I did in the beginning. I was like, okay, I'm not sure, and that, but then it instantly pulled right in. The Bandit Queens is so great. And I know that it's probably the first of this bunch that's going to be coming out in early January. But Parini, the story seems so real to me about the Bandit Queen who influenced the women and kind of guided a lot of what they did. Is it from a real legend, or is this something that you were able to create?
Thank you, Ron. No, the original Bandit Queen was a real life person. She was born Poolan Devi in a village in India, and absolutely real life character, because there's no way I could have come up with the her life, which was short but larger than life, really. She was born Dalit in a village in India, as I mentioned. So she was lower caste, or technically literally outcast in the caste system. And from a very young age, it was clear she had an irrepressible spirit. I mean, she committed her first act of protest at the age of 10, which is just extraordinary. And then she ran away from home, joined a gang, both committed and was subjected to a series of crimes before she was ultimately jailed. And then upon her release, she started in politics and became a female rights activist before she was assassinated at the age of 37. So a short but truly remarkable life. And when I was writing The Bandit Queens, my protagonist, Geeta, is living a very lonely, solitary life. And I kept returning to her sense of isolation, how she must feel. And I think when you are so lonely, in order to get up every day, in order to go to work, in order to get out of bed, you have to pull from a power source. And Pulin Devi seemed like the natural inspiration for Geeta. And for, Geeta is approached by the women in her microloan group to seek her consultation services so that the women can dispose of their own husbands and become self-made widows. And like you said, Pulin Devi becomes a running thread, a source of inspiration for these women's decisions to support one another and protect themselves for better or for worse.
Wow. Yeah, it's and I also have to say that the cover of the book is great. And if anybody also, it was one of the best book trailers of recent times that I've seen too. If anybody wants to go out and search for that, it's really kind of cool. It gives you a great overview about Geeta. And the colors are very vivid, and it kind of really speaks to like what they're wearing in the book and the thing. So it's a great match.
It was beautifully done. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go back to A Spell of Good Things. Okay. Enyola and I'm going to say this wrong. Rola?
Yeah, that's pretty close. Can just say Wura.
Okay. All right, good. But these are two characters that are, I think, memorable, and they're going to stay with readers for a really long time. They're just really deeply felt. And I think as a reader, for me, and I know others, you're going to get so drawn in, and you're really going to care about what happens to them in their lives from all the people around and all the things that they're dealing with. Tell us how you developed them and how you kind of worked towards intersecting their lives.
Thank you. So I'm going to begin with Wuraola, who in the novel, she's a young woman. She's in her late 20s, approaching what a family thinks is the grand old age of 30, and she's not yet married. And a big part of her life is that she's a young doctor working in a system where she doesn't have the kind of support that she really needs, So she's really just exhausted a lot of the time, and she has all this pressure all around her. And with her, there were aspects of her life that I was very familiar with. So the hospital where she works, in my mind, it's a place that I sort of grew up in. My mom is a doctor, and when I was in secondary school, I spent a lot of time in the hospital, so after school, I would just sit down in her office when she was on ward rounds. So I spent a lot of time in the hospital growing up. And around the time I started writing the novel, my sister had just become a doctor and was a junior doctor. And we're pretty close. So she told me a lot about just how hard and how difficult it was. And to just be a health worker, in Nigeria at that time, and I guess anywhere in the world now post-COVID. So with her, it was really piecing all these things together, and the aspect of the kind of pressure that she faces in relation to marriage. It's this, you have to have all the I's dotted and T's crossed type of things that you see in many families in Nigeria, and I guess in many parts of the world still, that she's accomplished something that she's very proud of. She's become a doctor. She's always wanted to be one. And all of a sudden it seems like, oh, that's not enough, but you're not married. None of this means anything if you're not married. And just aside, I remember an event I did in Lagos for my debut novel. And I just come off this really exhilarating tour with the book. And it was a really lovely event. And then I came down, and this man who's like in his mid-40s, I don't know him, walks up to me and says, this is all very good, but are you married? And I remember just looking at him like, what are you talking about? And I really wanted to capture that with this book, with this character, So what happens in the book is that you get the perspective of these two characters and then the members of their family, So Wurola, for instance, has a younger sister who's a teenager and is coming up, and she's noticed that this kind of pressure, even though she's so young, and you get to see that too, With Eniola, it was thinking about really trying to imagine myself into his world and his life. It, to be honest, was very far away from the way that I grew up. So it was in many ways more challenging, but also more interesting. Because it's part of why I write, that I like to imagine the lives of other people. So it was really deciding how their lives would interface and finding a connector, really. And in that case, the connector was the tailor, the point of intersection between those two families. And so once I found that, it was sort of easy to move back and forth through all the family members and see the story from so many perspectives. And I hope that it enriched the whole narrative.
Oh, are you kidding? Everybody has got to read this book. And I'll be up front. It's not an easy book to read because there's a lot of things in it that we'll talk about. Not what I won't talk about them, but we'll kind of cover that feeling about it in a minute. But it's just every time something would happen, I'd go like, "No, don't do that, don't do that," but then they do it. So it was really it's just such a great written, such a well-written book. Anyway,
thank you.
I told you all I'd go on with each of you for an hour, and I'm going to try to pull it back a little bit. So we're going to now go into the three of us, and Ore, describe how you inhabited each of these three very different characters and put them together in a linear story. Like one person starts telling the story and the second person picks it up where they leave it off, and the third one then finishes the story, all of course with cross backstory in it, but it's just a brilliantly constructed novel. So can you talk about that process and give us the skin?
Thank you. That's very kind of you. So I started off with the wife because I didn't know where the story was going. I just sort of wrote what I figured these two people might do hanging out together. And then I kind of was getting a bit bored of the wife, to be honest. And I was like, okay, who else's perspective is interesting here? Who else might we want to hear from? And I thought, okay, her husband, because her husband is the other person in this relationship, in this apparently three-way relationship, which he didn't sign up for. And I thought also Temi is the one who's kind of she is evidently the most outspoken of all three of them. And I thought she's the one who will have all if there are bombshells to be had, she'll have them, and they should come right at the end. And I think in terms of sort of inhabiting them, I had to really create a whole world that existed for them and what they thought, what they would dress like, where they would like to go, the kind of music they listen to, those kinds of things to make them feel like really full, real people. And actually, even the bits in the book where the husband and the best friend are talking about what they imagined their lives would be, that was part of my sort of doing character profiles to figure out exactly who these people are, what they're like, how they would respond in certain situations, things like that. And I think having them come one after the other, it meant that at the end of the wife section, you're kind of like, okay, that bit's done. We've kind of moved on to this. We've kind of moved on to the husband now. Things are sort of calmed down. And then the best friend sort of re-enters the picture. And it's like, okay, this is not over yet. Like there's still something else that's going to happen here. And I think it's funny because people have said, which is very nice, that the voices feel really distinctive. But the thing that I find quite funny is that even though as they've read it, people have said, oh, I think I'm on this person's team, I'm on this person's team. I think there's actually a little bit of each of them in all of us. There's the one that's outspoken about certain things when we don't want to stand for something. There's the one who kind of wants to keep the peace and doesn't want to like rock the boat in some situations. And then there's also the person who, on the one hand, wants to be quite firm, but also wants to sort of maintain the peace. And so I kind of love that there was an aspect of that in all of them. And I also wanted to change people's minds about each character, because I think when you have the wife's part, you think, oh, maybe her friend is a little bit crazy and her husband is maybe a little bit irritating. Then you get to the husband's part and you feel sorry for him. And then you get to the best friend's part and you're like, I don't know who to believe anymore. And I liked the whole idea of, one of the questions about the book is truth and who gets to decide what it is, and who gets to decide what it isn't. And can truth be changed? Can truth be changed depending on who's telling the truth, and how they're sort of displaying it? So I love that whole idea. But getting into their heads was quite fun, and being asked, obviously, like by my editors, to think about more what this person wants and what their motivations are, and could those motivations change, that kind of thing. But I think ultimately, like having it set out that way so that this person gets this area of the day, this book gets this section, also worked in terms of their mindsets, because for the wife, it's like, this is her every day, and then her friend is there. And for the husband, this is his every day, and then the friend is there. And then the friend is like, I'm always here, and I'm going to make my mark. I'm going to disrupt this whole situation. So it was really fun. And sort of, yeah, I think doing it that way did then allow for the reader to go through those like varying emotions of figuring out who they believed and who they liked and didn't like. So yeah.
Yes, and one of the great successes of the book is, I think we think it's going to go a certain way, and then it changes course, and then okay, it's going to go here, and then it doesn't. So you keep people going, even though it's such a finite time period in the book. So many different things happen and emotions come out. So I don't know if you all can see these messages popping up. There's so much love and anticipation for all of your work coming up. People are like, I can't wait. It sounds great. So. But we're doing our job. Okay, we're going to go over to Pineapple Street again. Jenny, the book, actually, one of the big parts of it is that it's a real kind of look at the 1% that that are all wealthy, but there's a lot of millennials that are coming into that too. What are you hoping that readers take away about the wealthy and millennials, and the way you kind of held a mirror up in front of their face?
So I was born in 1979, and so I'm what I like to refer to as a geriatric millennial. And I think that we geriatric millennials grew up, on the cusp of Gen X, and we were kind of immersed in like Clueless and Troop Beverly Hills and 90210 and MTV's Cribs and hanging out at the mall. And we were raised with this like really straightforward attitude towards money. I mean, as a teenager and in my 20s, my basic feeling was money is great and I would like to have some. But then as Gen Z came of age, they've just developed a much more thoughtful and complicated relationship with money. I mean, they watched the Occupy Wall Street movement at Zuccotti Park. They voted for Bernie and for AOC, and they've seen income inequality grow to a greater proportion than, in modern history. And for them, wealth is not awesome. Wealth is not aspirational. Wealth is morally suspect. So it's this, the two ends of the millennial spectrum have these incredibly different attitudes about money. And so for my book in Pineapple Street, the main family is the Stockton family, and they're this old money family, trace it back to the Mayflower, governors, shipping tycoons. Now they work in real estate investment, and all three children have healthy trust funds. They've been sent to the best schools, and they have each their own relationship with money. So Darlie and Cord, who are the two older ones, they're my generation. So the book takes place a few years ago. So they are late 30s, and for them, they have their hangups about money, but for them, it's more like, are my friends using me for my money? Or, do I have as much as this other friend? Or, ooh, is it going to make my marriage awkward because I have more than my spouse? But they're never like, hey, is this totally wrong that I have all this money? Like, that's just not a question on their radar. But then they have a younger sister who is Georgiana, who is a decade younger. And Georgiana is in her 20s. And for Georgiana, the winds of change are upon her. They are just more in the ether and more among her friends. And she grew up very coddled, but after school, she's taken a job, after graduation, she's taken a job working at a nonprofit. And at this nonprofit, she meets a guy who she starts to fall for. And he has spent his life working and living in Haiti and in Afghanistan and all around the world. And for the first time, Georgiana looks around and she thinks, well, I'm well traveled, but I've been to Paris and I've been to London and I walked the Great Wall of China with my private school class. And so sort of the scales begin to fall from her eyes as she realizes that no, she's not actually such a woman of the people. And then she crosses paths with this old school friend, Curtis. And Curtis is heir to this great defense fortune. But Curtis is rejecting his inheritance. Curtis is giving away his trust fund and making a really big statement that he feels generational wealth is immoral. And Georgiana's first impression of him is that he is possibly a sanctimonious twit, but also there is something that kind of grabs her eye about him and that pokes her somewhere that makes her really uncomfortable. And so her story goes from there. You know, I just feel like I'm one of these, it's very popular always to make fun of the generation below you, but I'm just going to go out there and publicly say that I am one of those old millennials who loves Gen Z. I think that Gen Zers, they're inheriting a mess. You know, they're inheriting an environment that is in catastrophe, and they are inheriting like the grossest economic inequality in American history. And they're not going to stand for it. And so when I see them growing up, it makes me feel really optimistic about the future. And I'm hoping that that's something that I got across in Pineapple Street, that it's not too late for us to change. It's not too late for us to do better.
Yeah, and I think Georgiana is like a great influence on everyone around her. And it was so much fun to watch the development of her character going through the story. So that's awesome. Okay, Martha, one of the things that we all know about you is that you really do extensive research and you really dive deep. Can you talk about the process for this book and maybe a few examples of how it actually lives in the book that we got to read?
Sure. I always go to the settings in my books, or at least with Lilac Girls, I started this kind of tradition. And because I went to Germany, I went to Ravensbrück in Poland, and that really helped me bring the book alive, I felt. So in my other books, like in Lost Roses, I went to Russia, which was crazy. And so in this, I wrote it, most of it during lockdown and COVID, but the second we were allowed to travel internationally, I went to Italy because I knew about France already. I'd been to Paris multiple times for the other books, but I'd been to Rome, but never to Northern Italy. And in my story, so much of it takes place with this rat line that I was talking about before, where the Germans came across the border into Italy and made their way down to Rome. So I booked with my husband a trip to Italy, and we started in Northern Italy. And, you know, I even though I'd read so much about it, and I kind of knew what had happened, I still was fuzzy on how did this happen? Thousands of Nazis escaped, and how did they just like hang out in Italy and all of that? So what I realized once I got there, it all became crystal clear. What happened was there was a network of people that helped them. It wasn't just them coming across the border. It was a network of Vatican officials and US Army, weirdly, and of course, Nazi sympathizers as well, that would meet these people at the border and help them. And they stayed in safe houses, monasteries, and, you know, where they were given robes to look like priests or monks. So that's what we did on our vacation, was go through Northern Italy, going to these places where they had hidden these Nazi fugitives. And it was really, really creepy, but also really helped in the book because, you know, my character, Josie, works for US Army intelligence, and she's tracking down this Dr. Snow, and she goes to Italy. So I felt like I had to do that as well. So after Northern Italy, we went to Verona, and I had documented places where, Mengele had stayed and other people. And finally we made it to Rome. And it was like being in the Da Vinci Code or something, because my husband and I, had to talk our way into the Vatican. That the Vatican was involved in the rat line. So it was really, really interesting to do it all without being able to say to anyone, we're here to, research this. We had to do it on the QT. But it was also just wonderful to see the Grand Hotel Palace where Josie stays in the book, and Piazza Navona, and, just to soak up after being, in lockdown for so long. It just felt so good to get out there. I didn't get to go to French Guiana, which is where the other character in the book, Arlette, she loses her son. And one day she works in a Paris cafe. Someone comes into the cafe and says, this man says, I think I know where your son is. And I think he's in French Guiana. So she goes down there. So I didn't get to go to French Guiana, but I don't know. That's on my list still. But yeah, it was an amazing, amazing trip. And I think it really helped the Italian parts of the book come alive.
It certainly did. It certainly did. Okay, we've been given the 10-minute warning. I can't believe it. It's going by so fast. So we're going to talk more about the Bandit Queens, though. Parini, each of your characters is very vivid and actually relatable, even though, we don't. I think some things cross culture and cross borders about the human condition, and that certainly is evident in the book. But their stories, in 1 minute, they're really laugh out loud funny, and they have such great senses of humor, and the humor comes through. But at the next time, there's horrifying things that happen to people, and things that just break our hearts. But can you talk about putting those together and how you kind of made that work? Because it really worked. The two merge so beautifully in the book.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really happy to hear that the tone worked for you, and I hope it resonates with other readers, because I definitely thought I was kind of crazy while I was writing it. Because you're right, like the book touches upon really dark themes such as casteism, domestic violence, misogyny, and the patriarchy. But I think the source of humor is in the female friendships and the female camaraderie as these women bind together as each other's second families to save each other. And I wrote this book, like many others, I wrote this book during quarantine in 2020. And I think during the dark times of the pandemic, I myself was aching for levity, and I needed some joy, as we've discussed here today. I needed joy, and I missed my own friends. I couldn't see my family, and I'm happy to hear that these characters are relatable, and you like them because they became my friends while writing it.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
They do. There's every aspect of us. There's the troublemaker. There's the person who's the caretaker. There's always, you can always find one of those in your groups of people. And there's a lot about microloans, and the caste system is just like,
right.
Is that how realistic is that to what things are like now?
I mean, the caste system must be annihilated. I hope that's like an absolute obvious takeaway upon reading the book. And like the violence against Dalits are committed at an alarming rate, whether in cities or villages. I do believe that segregation among caste in villages is more overt than in cities, but either way, like the damage is ubiquitous. And I think, in writing this book, I didn't feel like I was the right person to have the voice of a Dalit main character, but I knew that visibility and representation was important. And so I had another character, Kushi, who is not allowed in the microloan group because of her caste, and yet she does the work. She burns corpses because caste Hindus find that work to be polluting, but she's used the caste system to her benefit rather than being impoverished or downtrodden. She's managed to manipulate this oppressive system to make her own business on her own terms. And I'm not sure how truly realistic that is. It was important for me to have her an empowering role as a source of hope for moving forward and annihilating the system.
Right.
And
That's awesome. Okay, so we're down to the wire, but I want to give each of you a last minute to say something that you've been dying to tell people about your book. So let's start with A Spell of Good Things.
Well, I've got less than a minute. I just wanted to give a shout out to my editor, Jenny Jackson.
I know.
So yeah, that's all I want to say about the book.
That's awesome. Yeah, I read that in
she
an
was a
author's note.
fantastic editor. Yeah. And she's also a really great writer, obviously. Yeah,
It's
that's
awesome.
it.
Okay, the three of us.
Ooh, what to say? I hope you like it. Also, I should also say it was meant to be in the same vein as Jenny was saying about like bringing joy in books. It's supposed to be a joyful book. I don't know if people's experiences of it have been joy. People have told me that they found it very stressful to read, but in an entertaining way. But the purpose of it was supposed to be joyful and fun. So I hope you get some of that from it. And I hope I don't ruin any of your relationships or friendships as a result.
Which is, who's got the secrets? Who's got
Yeah.
the secrets? It made me want to drink wine. So,
Yeah.
that, so. Okay, Pineapple Street.
Well, so I have the funny privilege of being Ayobami's editor. And then also I really wanted to bid on the three of us and wish that we were working together on that book. But I will tell you, it is very funny. And I loved the characters. And also it just is like the sheer power of voice. You know, a character walks on stage and it's like the show has been stolen. So anyway, some really good selections here.
Yes, I think it's a great panel. It's a great group of things. Okay, the Golden Doves.
Okay. I just want to say that a lot of people ask me if this book is a sequel to my first book, Lilac Girls. And no, it is definitely not. It's a whole new story. But we do meet or revisit some of the characters from, in cameos, like Herta Oberhauser, the Nazi doctor, the only female doctor, and a couple others.
Awesome. Thank you. Bandit Queens.
I hope you have as much fun reading it as I did writing it, and I hope it makes you want to call up your friends and say, "Hey, we should hang out."
Yes, yes, I agree. This has been so amazing. Thank you to all of you for joining me today. It's been so much fun, and I just wish we had more time. Thank you to all the librarians and educators for joining us today. Next up, stay tuned. The lunch keynote is Matthew Desmond, Pulitzer Prize winning author, and he's a great speaker. So the very best part of a book club pick is its ability to expand our hearts and our minds. And I'm so excited for these titles to get into your hands and the hands of readers everywhere and get people talking. Thank you all for being here today.